Greetings from Boston. We are live. Live and uncut in the morning. Greetings, folks. I hope everyone is doing wonderfully. Good morning. Well, it's morning in Boston. I'm hoping this stream is coming through. I was having a couple of technical problems. I actually fell asleep. Having stayed up so late for the Federer match, I fell asleep last night in the fifth set of the Nadal match, but I did go back and watch it. I do want to talk about Nadal versus Thiem. What a match. Such brilliance on display from both players. I think it was Thiem who said after the match that both of the players were winners, and I sort of agree. Two gladiators, absolutely, Ollie. It was a tremendous slugfest, to be quite honest. Nadal was approaching a little bit more. Thiem just sticks to the baseline and just dictates from the baseline. Of course, there was the bagel to begin with. Let me say about Thiem, he is the great hope in the so-called lost generation. And he proved last night that he is worthy of that title. He really is. I mean, particularly in these five-set contexts, folks, Alexander Zverev just doesn't cut the mustard, as it were. In this context, I saw Zverev coming through this tournament in straight sets, but he seemed to be looking fine, and then of all people, Kohlschreiber knocks him out. But Thiem persevered. Thiem demonstrated such mastery and brilliance in the match against Anderson. And I said a few days ago that if Thiem could sustain that level of play, if he can dictate from the baseline, continue to find those lines at every available opportunity, continue swinging through those backhands. I want to talk about Thiem's backhand here in a second. It's such a thing of beauty, and it produces such beautiful variety in so many respects, and I want to talk about that. But let's break down Nadal versus Thiem. The nugget on this is that there was no real winner. This was truly a street fight. Each player a little bit battered at the end. Rafa, of course, understood that very well, and he embraced Thiem and had some kind words. I really like it when there's a coming together at the end of the match rather than those cold handshakes that happen so often on the ATP Tour. I like it when there's some camaraderie. And Nadal, you could tell, as the elder statesman, was playing the role of kind of the mentor and, again, the elder, taking Thiem a bit under his wing. Certainly, Dominic Thiem made a deep impression on Nadal today. There's no question about that. He took the great Nadal to 5. Again, I want to break this down. The nugget is that both players were fantastic, spectacular even. That's the word I would use for both of them. In the end, I think it was just a bit about Nadal's consistency, superior consistency over Thiem. And Nadal's just his fight, his unwillingness to give up, and his ability to stay positive. Can you imagine being bageled in the first set? Totally bewildered. But Nadal can stay positive. Nadal, after he received the bagel, with the bagel hanging around his neck, knew in his heart of hearts that he was going to win this match. And that's very impressive. I just love watching Nadal for all of that fight that he brings to the court. But let's talk about the first set for a second. Dominic Thiem was simply on fire. It was a 6-0 affair. We all were watching in awe of what Thiem was doing to the great Nadal, and Nadal could not articulate good responses, was getting suffocated by Thiem's depth and, to some degree, the variety. Thiem hits oftentimes what appear to be sort of moonballs on the backhand side. In particular, it's one of his pieces of variety that he can bring from the backhand side. And they look a little strange. They have that arc. They almost look like they're going out, but they're more like sort of moonballs, but they land real deep, and they, in fact, can give Nadal a hard time depending on where Nadal's standing. But particularly on the return of serve, they could sort of catch Nadal off guard. Well, Nadal hardly won any points in this set. I think there was only a few points he won. Thiem was 100% behind his first serve. Thiem was only finding the first serve in terms of getting it in about 50% of the time. But again, 100%, 71% behind his second. 13 winners to 2 unforced errors in this 6-love set by Thiem. It was a masterclass. He was 100% on the breakpoint conversions in the first set, 3 out of 3. 71% receiving, winning 71% of the receiving points. So he was unstoppable. And the only question, please repeat that, Cultura in Sport, if you had a question. Thank you very much. Thank you for your support. I'm glad we've got a reasonable stream going here. It was kind of freezing up there for a second, but the technical problems. We are, however, live and uncut. I'm giving you my views and perspectives on Nadal versus Thiem and what it means. I incidentally fell asleep. I was so exhausted from doing that really late Federer stream after the Federer versus Millman match. So I literally just zonked out in the 5th set, but I did get to watch all the match, and I finished the rest up this morning. Great to see you, Farzan. Thanks for your viewership. Thanks for your support, my friend. So the first set was just a tour de force, and that much is absolutely clear without a traceable vestige of uncertainty. That proposition is certain. Well, the only question was whether the dominator could sustain. Could he sustain that level? Now, my prediction a couple days ago was that he probably couldn't. And I wasn't predicting that he would come in such fine form even in the first set. But what happened here is some combination of Nadal's game being lifted to some degree. Nadal was finding his form. He wasn't quite on top of his form in the first set without question. But Thiem dipped a little bit, started making a few more unforced errors. Nadal started finding those very penetrating forehands and that were giving Thiem some difficulty. But Thiem was working the same kind of miracles he was in the first set, and they fought hard in this second set. There was a string of breaks where neither player could really hold their serve for about 2 or 3 games, but the string of breaks ended with Nadal taking the second set 6-4, kind of stealing it away. Farzan says the U.S. Open is dead to me now that Fed's out. Well, I want to talk about Federer, folks. For those of you who are Fed fans out there, I do want to get to that. I feel like I should probably devote some coverage to Nadal versus Thiem. This was a fantastic match. It has to be covered. And if you haven't seen it, even for the Fed fans, I would recommend it. Listen, Dominic Thiem doesn't bring the all-court game that Roger Federer brings. He, particularly the one that Roger Federer brought a couple of nights ago, he was partying like it was 1969. That's my word. That's my nugget on Federer in the match against Millman. Federer was partying like it was 1969, but it's not 1969, and that was a strange strategy. I want to talk a little more about that cultura. I do understand we shouldn't dwell on Federer too much, but there's more to say. There's a couple things that I didn't quite capture in my last stream. It was so late. It was 3 a.m. I was trying to make sense of it all. So I do want to make a few more remarks. But back to Nadal versus Thiem, this marathon 5-set match where Nadal escapes the grasp of the lost generationer. I suppose we could call him the lost generationer. Well, I have some views on that. I'm not so sure Dominic Thiem is lost. Let's talk about that in a second. But the final score, 0-6. It was a perfect start for Dominic Thiem, folks, but Nadal was able to pick it up and find the grit and the energy and the commitment to this match to stage a reversal. It was 0-6, 6-4, 7-5, 6-7, 7-6. So the last 2 sets were tiebreakers, and this just gives you a sense of what this match was all about. It was close. Thiem dropped off there in the second and third sets, but he came back, and it was just a razor-thin margin in the end for Nadal. It was really just 1 point in the final breaker. Well, in the third set, there was a chance for Thiem. Again, he had a break. He could have just protected his serve, really. You'd think that Thiem could protect, but Nadal, the anti-consolidator, was just relentless on the Thiem serve, and some more errors from Thiem were sneaking in. Thiem broke early in the set, so it looked promising, but Nadal bided his time, was patient, and ultimately broke back in the 8th game. Took the set 7-5 ultimately. Well, the 4th set got more interesting. It went to the breaker. There were a couple of breaks in this set, I believe, as well. Trying to look at my notes here. In the 4th set, Thiem did break early. But there was a break back, and they were all level by the time the breaker came around. Now, in the game before the breaker, in which Thiem was serving, Nadal missed a volley, which was a really should have been an easy volley. And the way that some of the commentators on the match were describing it is as sort of a pivotal moment in the match. Did that break Nadal, that one volley? Now, we've seen this before in tennis matches where it kind of comes down to single botched shots that kind of breaks the spirit of the player. And there was some speculation on the part of smart individuals, John McEnroe, a number of other people. I was going back and forth between the different ESPN coverages, and there were, I think, 4 or 5 or 6 commentators in total. I like to get all of their views so I can let them inform my commentary. I do like listening to John McEnroe and a number of the others, but the missed volley could have been a pivotal point. They were talking about it as if it were. Well, particularly in light of the fact that Thiem went on to win the breaker with some masterful play. Again, Thiem just dictating from the baseline, swinging through those one-handers, folks. It was a thing of beauty off the backhand wing for Dominic Thiem for the most part in this match. Thiem pulled ahead early in the 4th set breaker. He did have some gifts from Rafa that helped him out, that helped him squeeze out that 4th set breaker. Well, then it was even Steven. They were into a 5th set at the U.S. Open. This was going to get exciting. This was going to be a nail-biter. And the thing that kept going through my head is, when is one of these players going to break and collapse? It's going to happen to either one of them, and the match just kept going, and neither of the players showed any signs of dips or really fatigue. They were fully energized right up until the last second, the final shot of the match. And for all I know, they were still energized and they wanted to go out and play some more tennis. But the fifth set was a lot more even. There were no break points on the Nadal serve, so Nadal's serve really strengthened over the course of the match. Of course, in the first set, he was struggling a bit, but over the course of the match, Nadal's serve was increasingly being landed in all the right spots. Of course, he was going down the middle a number of times, but a couple of these first serves from Nadal were very impressive. Well, that came to my mind because Thiem is such a great server. I'm going to get back to Thiem in a second. I want to talk about Thiem, and I want to relate him back to Federer. Even though he's the loser in this match, he really deserves some commentary of his own, but Rafa does deserve the primary credit, of course, in this match. There were 5 break points on the Thiem serve during the course of the fifth set, and Dominic Thiem saved all of them, which was, again, promising, though you could sense that the Thiem serve, obviously, was under pressure a little more than the Nadal serve, and when I have evidence like that, and when the set seems to be going to a breaker, I tend to kind of softly predict that the player whose serve is under pressure might struggle in the breaker. It only makes sense. But during the course of this set, the numbers, the raw stats do show that Nadal was just better all around. Just a bit. It was just an edge. It was a couple of percentage points on the serving and returning. But Thiem was holding his own. Culture and Sport says Thiem cracked at the end of the second and third set. Potentially, yes. There were some cracks. He buckled. It was a long street fight. The longest match played at the U.S. Open, I believe, so far. One of the longest, I think the longest match Nadal's ever played. This was a real test for both players, but Thiem did struggle, but you could say the same thing about Nadal. In fact, you could say that Nadal struggled even a bit more when you take into account that first set. But that wasn't the true Nadal, was it? I mean, again, just as every match outcome rests on partly what the winning player did right and the losing player did wrong, every set outcome rests on what the winning player did right and what the losing player did wrong. But Thiem was doing a lot of things right in that first set. Rafa wasn't totally off his game. He just was having a hard time responding. He was just suffocating. The relentless onslaught of the walloping Thiem ground strokes, dictating from the baseline. That's the key to Thiem. He dictates from the baseline. Absolutely irretrievable, accelerating backhand cross courts from Thiem all night. Just plentiful from the backhand side. It was a beautiful thing to see. But in the breaker, it was very close, and it all came down to one point, the final point, where Thiem just totally botched an overhead. So I had a question a couple of minutes ago about whether there was fatigue involved here. Well, when you see Thiem botch that overhead to close out the match and hand the match over to Nadal, it does raise the possibility that some fatigue had come into play, at least in those final moments. So maybe that's what this match comes down to. Just that little bit of fatigue. It was such a great match. Again, my nugget on this match is that they were both winners. And I think Nadal and Thiem said something to that effect. I mean, it was just by a hair, folks. Just a hair that Nadal could escape this thing. But let me say that Nadal was playing fantastically. let's put aside the first set. Maybe that was a bit of a hiccup, but we need to give a lot of credit to Thiem. Nadal was in very, very fine form. Thiem won more points during this match, and I think he was more balanced in his ground game in terms of both wings. Nadal was just demolishing the forehands. By demolishing, I mean hitting them very well. Some of these terms I use can have a bit of a double meaning. Devastating is another term that has a double meaning. But he was clobbering these forehands with that ungodly amount of topspin, lots of acceleration, lots of direction, lots of dictation. He missed a few things. Nadal missed that very simple volley in the fourth set, and some folks were saying that was a turning point. It wasn't. He soldiered on, folks. This is one of the phenomenal aspects of Rafael Nadal, one of the phenomenal character attributes of the great Nadal. He soldiers on, and he doesn't get down. He doesn't get down, and he was swimming upstream, as it were. The history did not suggest that Nadal could recover after losing the first set at love. It didn't suggest, all the history suggested that when Nadal gets bageled, he loses the match. And the history suggested that when Thiem bagels an opponent, he wins the match. Well, that should be pretty clear, obviously, although sometimes players do execute reversals after getting bageled, but apparently Nadal has not been able to do so, at least not in the Grand Slams. Of course, he hasn't been bageled very much. This was an exceptional occurrence, without question. It was unbelievable. It was almost miraculous. Cultura says, in my view, I don't think... So I watched the whole match until the end, but I couldn't get the last bit of that. Thank you for the comment. Rafa, to my mind, Cultura was maybe operating, with a fairly empty tank of gas, but he did have some gas in there, and he was able to persevere. Again, Nadal was more balanced. Thiem was more balanced in his ground strokes, delivering winners from the backhand side, winners from the forehand side. A very balanced player. I mean, his ground strokes, when they're on, are pretty much unmatched in a way. They're sort of peerless. Thiem, for those of you tuning in, I invite you to subscribe to the channel to get the Tennis Talk Daily live streams daily. Well, last night, I apologize because I was so exhausted. Yes, Rafa is almost unbreakable mentally. See, Federer was unbreakable in Cincinnati on his serve, but that's just a serve. That's just a statistic, right? The question is he unbreakable mentally? And we'll get to Federer in a second. But Nadal, mentally, the mental game, the psychological component of his game is unmatched without question. But in terms of the technical ground strokes, the kind of balanced game from both wings, Thiem was Nadal's superior on this particular day. Nadal was leaning heavily on his forehand, and why wouldn't you, right? But Thiem was just firing off winners from both wings like gangbusters, folks. It was a beautiful sight to behold. On the other hand, Nadal was a little more consistent than Thiem. Of course, he brought that lethal forehand, and he served quite well, too. Nadal had 55 winners to 49 unforced errors. So Thiem was requiring that Nadal play some pretty aggressive, risk-taking tennis. Nadal had to kind of execute a lot of forward momentum, found himself at the net quite often. But again, 49 errors from Nadal over the course of this match, but the winners exceeded the errors from Nadal. But the point is that Nadal had to play aggressively, and it's because Thiem required Nadal to play aggressively. There were a couple points where Nadal kind of reclined into more of a pushing mode, more of a defensive mode, but it wasn't working. Not against Thiem. So, Aaron, if Rafa wins the U.S. Open, do you think he becomes the GOAT? A great question. I think he will be moving closer to a potential argument about that, folks. There's no question about it. Listen, for you Fed fans out there, we're going to continue talking about Federer. If Federer does not live on in terms of being a Grand Slam winner for a little while, we are going to make sure he lives on by talking about him, by remembering him. He is always going to be a central reference point of this channel. So for those of you coming on, if you're Fed fans, we will be using Federer as a reference, no matter whether he's playing or not. That's the truth, because he is. He is undeniably the key reference point in modern professional tennis. I'm saying outlast was not I'm getting a comment that said outlast is not the right word. Thank you very much for that comment. I enjoyed being taken to task and having little debates. I think outlast is a pretty good word, to be honest. Outplay is in there too. I'll consider changing that. But my view on this match, and I do admit I love Dominic Thiem, and I want to talk a little bit about Thiem's relevance in all of this. But tennis rules, Nadal was the delivery man last night. Absolutely true. Marathon man of the tournament. And I had a comment about Nadal's backhands. He was relying a lot on his forehand and running around a number of backhands. Probably not as much as Thiem, but Thiem again displayed a lot more balance in terms of winners coming off both the backhand and the forehand sides. So that was a piece of this match that we need to take into account for those of you who think that Nadal was just, clearly outplayed Thiem. No, Nadal did not clearly outplay Thiem, folks. It's just not true. So thank you for the comment, but I would like to stick to outlast. I was considering escapes. In other words, Nadal escapes Thiem. We're talking about the headline to this video, by the way, and the terminology that I use. I try to capture the right verb with each of these matches, and sometimes I don't get it quite right. I think outlast is just about as good as any I can think of. There may be a couple of other verbs I could use. The Nadal fans would prefer outplay, but I really don't think that's the most appropriate verb here. In terms of describing what happened in this match, no, sir. This was a close match. This was a street fight in those last two sets. It was ugly. Of course, the first set was just a bloodbath, but after things kind of found a rhythm with both players, it turned into a real competition. There was no contest in that first set, obviously, and Nadal looked strange. I must admit, I think all of us probably felt the same way. Comment below on this, but how did you feel watching Nadal, particularly for the Nadal fans? How did you feel watching Nadal in that first set? He did look scared in a way. He was getting some pep talk from his box, but and then he was kind of telling them to calm down a little bit, like, I've got this under control, I got this. Well, that's all commendable that he apparently thought he could do it, or maybe he didn't feel like he needed the pep talk, but just by the look on his face, you really could tell that he was struggling. This was a problem for him. A storm was moving in, and he did not have shelter, folks. He needed shelter from this storm that we call Dominic Thiem. And the excitable bull couldn't produce a lot of answers. In that first set, he only won a few points. Again, Thiem was 100% on his first serve and just clobbering the ball with immense precision and immense surprise. It was surprise attacks. Nadal could not foresee what was happening with Thiem. So he had to basically find a little niche. And there was not a lot of experience between Thiem. There was no experience between Thiem and Nadal on hard courts in particular. They've only played on clay. Nadal has the winning record, but Thiem has been able to beat the great Nadal on the red dirt a number of times. I think it's 3 times now, though never in the best of 5 context. Well, the upshot and the nugget on it is that on Nadal versus Thiem is that there was no real winner. The suggestion by the commentators that the missed volley by Nadal in the 4th set right prior to the breaker, if he'd executed the volley correctly, he would have had a set point. But instead they went to the breaker and Thiem won the breaker. The suggestion that was somehow, breaking the spirit of Nadal, or that would be a turning point in the match, proved to be wrong. And Nadal had a lot of spirit. I don't know why a commentator would say that, but again, there was just not a lot of precedent for coming into a 5th set for Nadal at this stage in the tournament. There was a question as to whether he could last and whether he could sustain this. It was a long match, and what kept going through my head was Thiem's younger. So is this the time when youth prevails? Remember, Millman sent Federer back to Switzerland the other day, and it was in large a matter of, I think, fitness, to be honest, particularly in light of Federer's comments after the match. It was in large part about the fitness. What can I say? Let's talk about the Federer match a bit more. And if I get comments from you saying, no, Aaron, forget about Federer, we don't want to talk about Federer, well, I'll respond to that. I've got other stuff to talk about. I don't want to be too long on this, but I wanted to talk a little bit more about just why Federer lost. And some people think, we overanalyze this. Good comment, Cultura. Well, my favorite excuse, there's a few people that are making some interesting propositions as to why Federer lost to the relative unknown John Millman. Of course, I've got people from Australia, viewers, coming on and saying, no, John Millman's not unknown. He's been around. He's our favorite. Well, yes, for the Aussies, I'm sure he's been around. And I've seen his name as well. But the reality is he's not been producing exceptional results. He fell to Djokovic, who's going to be his next opponent. He fell to Djokovic in straights at Queens and doesn't have a record that would suggest that he could be mowing down Federer in the manner that he did. Well, part of that had to do with the conditions, but my favorite excuse, people are blaming the Federer loss on a number of things, but my favorite thing to blame on the Federer loss, for the Federer loss, is global warming. It's global warming's fault. It's rampant industrial capitalism, insensitive to the environment. It's the drivers of SUVs that produced this terrible loss for Federer. So reduce your carbon emissions. Let's stop global warming so Roger Federer can win again. Well, it's not exactly a very convincing thesis, kind of funny, but Federer did lay quite a bit of emphasis on the heat in terms of why he lost. So I'm getting one person saying no need to overanalyze. I'm just going to finish this up real quick. But the heat was obviously a problem. But my response is everybody had to deal with the heat. John Millman didn't say anything about the heat. There was also a comment about Federer about the circulation on Ash or in the building of Ash. Maybe they had the roof closed. I mean, you'd think they'd have some air conditioning in there, but Federer just was saying he couldn't get a breath. Well, it's just not a great kind of excuse, basically, but it's the truth, apparently. He couldn't come up with any other way to explain this. There was also the suggestion that an injury And let me just say, the conditions were brutal. I don't mean to undermine what Roger stated. I believe you, Roger, if that's what was happening. You couldn't get a breath. But the question is why? I mean, why Millman was getting his breaths and the other players were getting their breaths. Sloane Stephens was knocked out of the tournament the other day, and she had to play in the afternoon. Federer's match was a nighttime match. So it does raise the question of, why do you get a special pass here, Roger? Well, listen, I'm checking out some questions. Hope you will answer. Why Djokovic? Repeat that question again. If you could repeat it in a smaller phrase, just state the question, because the way this particular camera works is that I get the comments. I still have to figure this out, but the comments come up and they disappear after a while. I got to get the settings right, so the comments are giving me a little more time. Repeat the question about Djokovic. I will talk about Djokovic, but the other thing about the Federer match, of course, is that it was a nighttime match. And while it was probably a bit cooler, it was measurably cooler, though not that much more. It was an odd time to be playing. I mean, but listen, we're human beings. We sleep at night. We stay awake in the daytime. That's what we do, and that's what Federer does. It's what all of us do. I suppose there are other people who like to stay up at night. Tennis players are generally not night owls that are staying up till 2 and 3 a.m. So it has to do with the circadian rhythms, the biorhythms. I think part of it was a very late match against Millman, and I think Federer's body not only is at 37 and maybe not what it used to be. Hi, Patrick. Greetings. I'm seeing Cultura say hi. Why tennis players like Djokovic and other players from Eastern Europe are unpopular in the U.S.? Great question. Let me get to that in a second. Well, it's interesting. In college, for one reason, I went to college in California at the University of California at Berkeley. And for one reason or another, it's interesting, I ended up befriending an enormous number of both Serbians and Croatians. Now, you'd think there'd be some conflicts there, but they were all friends too over here in the context of going to college in the United States. Most of them were engineering majors. But I ended up befriending a lot of Serbian folks, and a few of them are still my really good friends. And so, I don't know, I've had an openness to particularly Serbians. One of my best friends from college is Serbian, and he came to the United States under very unfortunate circumstances, right out in the middle of those wars. His parents didn't fare well in those wars, and there was... Brano was his name. He had a lot of problems to begin with. He came here with $50 in his pocket. Well, talk about commitment. Talk about commitment to succeeding and commitment to the American dream. Brano, my friend, put his shoulder to the wheel, worked his way through Berkeley, ended up going to the #1 business school in the nation, and he's just so successful and so rich right now. It's amazing. And I just love to see it because he came to the country with $50 in his pocket. So that informs my views on Djokovic. And we have a number of Serbians and Croats that excel in professional tennis. I'm not sure what it is about that environment over there, but maybe it is the fight, the fight that they have, the kind of rough history they have of the wars in the 90s and whatnot. Now, we could talk more about that, but in terms of the unpopularity, listen, I don't think they're extremely unpopular, but I think the critical background to that, to the extent that the Serbians are less popular, and you're suggesting they're less popular just because they're from Serbia. I'm not sure I agree with that, but let's assume that maybe they are a little less popular. I think Djokovic is demonstrably less popular. I mean, I guess if you go over to the Twitter followers or whatever, you can glean that. But given his record, you would think that that maybe he would have some more support. But here's what it comes down to with Djokovic. And I think it's Djokovic. Let's kind of focus on Djokovic. I think on the one hand, it comes, and we're talking about an interesting question that's been posed about why potentially the Serbians and the Croats might be, I think it was just the Serbians they were asking about. And Tennis Rules is saying that Djokovic can be problematic on the court, and he can have a bad attitude sometimes. He does smash a racket from time to time without question. And he did in that match against Milos Raonic. Often it does him good, and he goes on to win the match. He loves the adversity. But with Djokovic in particular, I think there's two pieces of context, I think. The first is that the context of the 1970s and the 1980s and even the 1990s being something of an age of American dominance in professional tennis, right? A lot of great players being produced by the United States, top number one players, McEnroe, Connors, of course, Sampras, and many others. Well, that all ended, and now we're into an age of essentially European dominance. But Federer and Nadal became the favorite players, of course. They became the legends. That was the rivalry that was attracting the audiences, attracting the fans. Well, Djokovic came along and started to slay the legends. So even the Americanists, even the people that missed the age of American dominance, the Americans who wanted more, say, Andy Roddick to be the next Pete Sampras or whatever, even the Americans, they were a little upset about Djokovic coming along and slaying these legends. That's one theory. Because Djokovic he's kind of the bull in the china closet, isn't he? He came along and just wrecked that narrative of Rafa and Federer as the two greatest players ever and as kind of the key rivals over the course of the last 10 years. Djokovic ruined that. He rained on that parade, and he holds winning records against both Nadal and Federer. So Djokovic is a legend slayer, folks, and I think that's part of why some people may be uncomfortable with him. Certainly Fed fans, real dedicated Fed fans, might have an issue with Djokovic for that reason, that he keeps beating Roger Federer. There's other reasons that you might not favor Djokovic. Maybe stylistically, he's not your favorite player. Although I would say that even I have criticized Djokovic stylistically sometimes, but he's got a number of different incarnations, a number of different sort of styles of play he can bring to the court. And he came out against Gasquet the other night. I talked about this match a few streams back, and just totally dominated. He was the aggressor. He was the aggressor nation in that match, and hitting winners left and right. And yet then he can recline, which is a verb that I will use from time to time. He can sort of recline into more of a defensive mode. And of course, on defense, he's just such a machine. So there's a couple different personas that Djokovic has on the court. But in general, he slayed the legends. And for that reason, there's a bit of tension, I think. But we'll see. It's yet to be seen what his legacy will really be. And he's still hard at work trying to produce this legacy. We're going to see some evidence of that a little later. So that's on Djokovic. But back to Federer for just 1 second. And then I want to come back and talk about a few other things. The nighttime match, I think, if we're going to blame conditions and circumstances for Federer's loss, I think the nighttime match stretching into the wee hours is probably more of a factor in explaining why Federer lost than the heat and the fact that, as Federer said, he couldn't get a breath. He did look like he was struggling to get a breath, to be honest, but I think that had more to do with just the way his body, his circadian rhythms. We are diurnal creatures. which means that we live in the daytime and we are awake in the daytime. We sleep at night. It's pretty simple. And all the tennis players do the same thing, and putting them under this stress of the nighttime matches that run late. And they get later and later and later, too, because I don't know why they schedule these things. The scheduled times for these matches are unrealistic. Have you noticed that? None of them start on time. It's just it's almost a foregone conclusion that the match before is going to go longer than the length they've scheduled it for. So they need to tweak the scheduling. Now that'll change as we come into these final rounds, and I hope there's more timely starts and ends. Well, ends you can't control. So the nighttime match, a big factor. But I talked about the other night about his strategy in this match. And as I've said, the way I'm putting it, Roger Federer was partying like it was 1969 in the match against Millman. Tonight, we're going to party like it's 1969. That was his basic approach to this match. It was fairly inflexible because he didn't change a thing. He didn't change a thing. I mean, when that approach started to not work, he didn't change. He just kept going, kept applying the same strategy. And by party like it's 1969, I basically mean that kind of Rod Laver style of play, which is very much all court, but to a degree that actually doesn't make sense in this day and age. It's a way to lose. Just ask Misha Zverev. Misha Zverev he does have one title. I think he's 30, above 30 years old probably, but he does have one title, and he played a fantastic final in the match at Eastbourne against Lukas Lachko, which is really one of the greatest exhibitions of serve and volley I've ever seen in my entire life. But Misha Zverev does not come out and do that every match, not even close. It's a risky style of play, and Federer was executing that style of play. It was too forward. That's what I mean by partying like it's 1969. He was playing like he was in another era. And that's part of it. But the question is why? Why was he playing like that? And this does relate back to the conditions, I think. It strikes me that Federer came out and decided, Michael, you were there last night. Let's hear your comments. What was it like? I thought both players were fantastic, just spectacular. How were you feeling when Nadal received the bagel in the first set? What was the crowd feeling at that point? Do tell. But the question is, why? Why was Federer executing that strategy? Was he just trying to entertain himself, keep himself interested in the match? No, I don't think. I think it's back to the heat. I think it's back probably to the circulation. I think he came out and he said, listen, I want to win this concisely. I want to win this in 3 sets. And if I can't do it, if I can't end points quickly, if I can't win this quickly, in other words, I'm probably not going to win it at all. I think that was his proposition coming in. That was his assumption. He was applying this strategy, and the goal was to win the match quickly. And if he couldn't win it quickly, he would lose it. That seems like, at some point in the match, that seems like what Federer decided. If I can't win this decisively and quickly in a few sets by ending points, again, fairly quickly, 2-3 shots approaching all the time, then I'm not going to win it. If I can't do it like Rod Laver, now some of you are mentioning that Rod Laver did start using topspin, that brought topspin into fashion to some degree, of course. But the style of play from 1969 was, again, all the top players were serve and volleyers. All the top players were coming to the net a lot more often. And so it's a little joke, but again, I think it does pretty aptly describe what happened to Federer. the other night with Millman, which is that Federer was partying like it was 1969. Well, it was great to watch. It was brilliant. Some of it was just absolutely masterful, without question. Flashes of brilliance, but not enough. And Federer just could not weather the Millman storm, and he wasn't in his responsive mode. He was ensnared in a strategy, the party like it's 1969 strategy, and uncharacteristically incapable of actually feeling out and responding the player on the other side of the court, who happened to be Millman. Whereas Millman was very much a chameleon during that match, trying to figure out how to best push Federer's buttons. But Millman certainly outlasted Federer and ultimately outplayed Federer, was smarter than Federer in many ways. Well, after the match, Federer said at some point he wanted the match to end. So that supports my thesis that he wanted to either win it quickly or end it. And if it had to be a loss, he was willing to accept that. It was either win it quickly or lose it. That's what Federer said. Well, he mentioned the slower conditions but he mentioned the slower conditions earlier in the week. The slower conditions should have suggested to Federer that this strategy of his, the party like it's 1969 strategy, wasn't such a great idea because, again, all the courts have slowed over the years. That's one very critical circumstance that distinguishes the modern professional tennis circuit from the tennis circuit that existed in 1969 and the playing style that existed in 1969. So the slower conditions are no excuse. Federer should have known that, and Federer should have actually, I think, based on the slower conditions, he should have adjusted his approach, which, again, do some dictation from the baseline. Roger could have taken a hint from Dominique Thiem and the way that Thiem has been playing in this tournament, without question. So those are my thoughts on Federer. Listen, the smorgasbord of drop shots that Federer was executing in the match with Millman might have worked against a bigger guy, is another thing I was thinking. It might have worked against like a Del Potro, a Zverev, an Isner, because they have a hard time getting up to the net, have a hard time crouching down a little bit to get to those shots. So that could have worked, but Millman's not a big guy. He's really agile, really quick. So again, none of this made sense, except if we assume that Federer wanted he wanted a quick win or no win. It was the party like it's 1969 strategy because, whether it be based on the heat or the circulation, he wanted either a quick win or no win. That was the mood he was in. But the final thing I will just reiterate about Federer is that I do believe the circadian rhythms were part of why he didn't feel up to form, wasn't executing as well as he usually does. Although I'm not sure he's ever executed that particular style of game. I mean, I can't remember the last time he came up to the net almost 90 times in a 4-set match. Maybe that's happened. I mean, probably at Wimbledon it happened in the early days. Maybe in the 2001 Wimbledon when he took down Sampras, he was doing a lot of serving and volleying at that point. But not within the last 10 years. I just can't remember anything like that. So, listen, I could go on and on about this, but the final point is that this was a nighttime match. I think he just didn't feel well playing at 1 a.m. I think his body was used to being asleep. Now, granted, I'm sure they had to have done some training at midnight or 1 o'clock during the course of the week. I'm sure Federer did get out and train. He knew this night match was coming, and he knows how long they go. But this year, for whatever reason, I think his body just wasn't prepared for, an exciting, challenging hard-fought tennis match at 1 a.m. It stretched on to 2 a.m. I just think his body was not prepared for that. And so in my own experience, that was mirrored for me because I came on and did a live stream at 3 a.m. after the Federer match, and I was feeling a little groggy myself, couldn't articulate myself so well at 3 a.m. Well, you can understand why that was happening. So just as I was struggling at 3 a.m., so too Federer was probably struggling at 3 a.m. Probably youth prevailed over age in that respect because Millman could kind of just push through it. I was thinking in the match with Thiem and Nadal that, again, youth would prevail over age. I was thinking Thiem because I kept thinking as the match progressed, someone has to buckle. This is going to a fifth set. It's going to a fifth set tiebreaker. Someone has to buckle. And neither of the players buckled. That's the astounding thing. Neither of the players buckled. So that's great. It was a spectacular match of tennis. The phraseology of my headline is that Nadal outlasted Thiem. I think that's about the best way to put it. I think both players did a splendid job. And again, spectacular really is the only word for it. Spectacular play coming from both players. Now let's talk about Thiem for a second. The beauty of Thiem, because he's not going anywhere. He couldn't escape this one, but he's not going anywhere. He's going to be around, and he is progressing. This was an achievement for him. Taking the great Nadal to 5 sets, bageling the great Nadal. Yes, my heart goes out to Thiem as well. Thiem is going home. He is, but he really put on a great show, folks, and it was a beautiful, beautiful thing. Here's the beautiful thing about Thiem, and this relates back to Roger Federer. The beautiful thing about Thiem is he is something of a torchbearer, folks. Right at the moment that Federer is ousted, and that might be seen in retrospect as a very significant moment. Federer's loss to Millman at the U.S. Open this year. It might in retrospect be really it could be his last run into the fourth round. We don't know. We just don't know. But right at that moment, you have Thiem that comes forth in that match with Anderson. And I wager that Thiem was essentially unbeatable on that day against Anderson. I don't think Nadal could have beat him. I don't think Djokovic could have beat him. I don't think Federer could have beat him. I think he was unbeatable on that day against Anderson. Go back and watch that match. But the only question is, coming into the Nadal match, is could Thiem sustain? And based on the history of it, the conclusion had to be that he probably couldn't sustain because he hasn't been able to do it. But he did. He did sustain. He came in, took Nadal to the bagel shop. He was just striking the ball so well over the course of the match. And so he redeemed himself in that respect. I think he did deliver. He did deliver a very high level of tennis. Not quite as high as in the match with Anderson, but a very high level. So that's a great achievement for Dominic Thiem. And they call him part of the lost generation. I don't think he's lost. I think he may be the first Grand Slam champion in that lost generation. That's what I think. And I think it's a supportable proposition. But here's the beauty of Thiem. He's a big server. He brings a huge serve. In terms of being a server, he's a much better server than Nadal or Djokovic. I mean, it's on the magnitude of a Federer. His serve is almost as good as Federer's when it's landing. And in fact, his numbers that he was posting were better than Federer's this week. A fantastic server, but in no way a serve bot. He is devastating from the baseline, folks. No question about it. And he brings the excellent one-hander and can do so much with the one-hander. The forehand is a huge weapon for Thiem, without question. Without question. Holds the potential to be as good as the Nadal forehand. I'm not sure it holds the potential to be like a Delpo forehand, but he does hit it flat sometimes, and a couple of shots last night did kind of remind me of Delpo coming off of Thiem's forehand. But the one-hander on the backhand side is absolutely phenomenal, very dependable, a lot more dependable than Rogers these days. And for those of you who loved that neo backhand at the Australian Open, well, Thiem is bearing that torch, folks. He was just nailing these backhands, and it reminded me of neo backhands from Federer at the 2017 Australian Open. So he brings the one-hander, he brings the big serve, he's got a lot of variety on the backhand side. He can hit those kind of moon balls, he can slice, he can hit pretty flat penetrating strokes, he can put a lot of topspin on it, he can hit the drop shots. And the only real difference between he and Federer is that, or one of the key differences, I don't want to say they're different people, they're different players, but one of the main key differences is that Thiem just doesn't play the net. He doesn't serve and volley. So that is a stark contrast to Roger Federer, particularly in the match with Millman, where Roger, as I've said now a few times, I want to repeat it because I want you guys to repeat this. It's a nice way to describe it. Roger was partying like it was 1969 in the match with Millman. But the beauty of Thiem is this. Fedal. Thiem is the embodiment, folks, of both Federer and Nadal. That's right. He is the embodiment of both Federer and Nadal because he brings the big Federer serve, the big Federer-esque serve. He brings the one-hander. But he absolutely is a baseliner as well, and he dictates from the baseline. He is reminiscent of Nadal, to be quite honest, in many ways when you think about his sort of baseline style. So that's the beauty of Thiem, folks. Not only is he a torchbearer with respect to Roger and the one-hander, but he's a Nadal torchbearer as well. He brings them together. He is Fedal in a way, to a much greater extent than, say, a Zverev is. Certainly not a Dimitrov. A Dimitrov is kind of like just Roger. He's like unadulterated Roger. But with Thiem, he brings together both of these styles, folks. That's why he's going to be a big name. That's why, while he's often placed in the so-called lost generation, he's not lost. He's coming up, and he's going to win Grand Slams. That's my prediction. Let's talk a little bit about Delpo versus Isner. I'm going to have to close this stream out in a little while, but Delpo was able to get through Isner in 4 sets, 6-7, 6-3, 7-6, 7-2. 6-2, excuse me. 6-7, 6-3, 7-6, 6-2. Last set, fairly decisive. There was a key hold in the third set for Delpo. I'm looking through my notes. Listen, Isner looked good in this match, but it came down to Delpo's consistency, to be honest. Isner's legs seemed to be giving him some problems, and Delpo was just getting all up into the Isner second serve. In the final set, Delpo broke in the second game, went up 2-0, and broke again later in the set for good measure. Generally, Delpo served well. He's getting 63% of his first serves in, winning 89% of his firsts, 64% of his seconds. Isner's serve numbers were much lower, or measurably lower. Delpo had 14 unforced errors in this 4-set match to Isner's 52 unforced errors. 49 winners hit by Delpo to Isner's 67. So Isner was going for the aggressive approach, but Delpo was a lot more consistent, created 11 break points on the mighty Isner serve and converted 3 of them during the course of the match. But generally, the Delpo consistency, the very dependable forehand, and the very strong serving is what enabled the tower from Tandil to land a spot in the quarterfinals where he will, in the semifinals where he will meet the great Nadal. So let's talk a little bit about, let's see, do I have something written here on Nadal versus Delpo? I should. Well, let's see here. I'll talk about that a little more. I'm probably going to do a stream a little bit later. Other than that, Nishikori came through Cilic. Nishikori. Now I'm getting confused. Now, I did get sleep last night, but I didn't get a lot of sleep. In any case, Cilic versus Nishikori will happen. That's going to happen today. Djokovic versus Millman's going to happen today as well. Let's talk a little bit about Nishikori versus Cilic, and then I'm going to close this out. Cilic has been doing quite well. He did suffer a bit against the Australian, de Minaur. And as a sidebar, and for those of you Aussies in the audience, I wanted to query, do we have an Australian ascendancy that is, happening here in professional tennis? Well, Kyrgios, de Minaur. De Minaur, I think, is one of the most promising players on this circuit. Millman, we'll have to see what happens to Millman, whether he will be a flash in the pan like Marco Cecchinato or whether he'll stick around. We'll just have to see. And we'll talk about Djokovic versus Millman in a second. But Nishikori versus Cilic. Cilic, of course, dropped the first 2 sets to de Minaur in one of his previous matches, but came storming back and then was able to pretty decisively put away David Goffin, which was kind of saddening because I wanted to see Goffin do better. But Nishikori versus Cilic, 8-6 in the head-to-head, and I believe Nishikori leads in that head-to-head. He beat Cilic in Monaco in the quarterfinals in 3 sets this year. On the hard courts in particular, Nishikori is 6-5 against Cilic. Well, they met at the U.S. Open in 2010. Nishikori won in 5 sets. It went to 2 breakers, both won by Nishikori. Nishikori posted great serving numbers and great second serve return percentages, right around 50%, which is pretty good against Cilic. Created 19 break points on the Cilic serve. So, again, Nishikori's going to have to serve well, and he's going to have to attack the Cilic second serves and hope that he can convert at least 20 to 30%, depending on how many break points he can create. But again, 19 break points on the Cilic serve in that 5-set match in which Nishikori prevailed. So to me, it's all about the return. Nishikori's got to keep his service game solid and protected, obviously, but it really is all about the return game, trying to find holes in the Cilic service game and exploiting them. Well, they also met at the U.S. Open in 2012, and that on that particular occasion, Cilic did emerge the victor. Cilic was serving tremendously and backing those serves up impeccably. He saved 8 of 9 break points in that match, so that's going to be one key for Cilic. Save the break points. Nishikori will create them, but Cilic must save them. On the first serve return percentage, Cilic was about 34%. On the second serve return, about 43%. So he needs to stay solid on the return numbers, but most of all, he needs to protect his serve, save the break points. At least that is one of the keys that is suggested by the 2012 match at the U.S. Open in which Cilic prevails. So, again, Nishikori has prevailed once at the U.S. Open against Cilic. Cilic has prevailed against Nishikori on another occasion at the U.S. Open. Nishikori does lead by 2 in the head-to-head. It's 8-6. So that will be an interesting match. I'll do more comments on that probably later tonight. I'm doing a little catch-up today because I fell asleep. For those of you just tuning in, I fell asleep at the end of the Nadal match last night because I was so exhausted. But I was able to catch the rest of it, and we've done, obviously, a discussion about that. I'll be back later today to do day 10. We're in day 10 now, but this was sort of a day 9 summary, doing a bit of catch-up. For those of you tuning in, please subscribe to the channel. Remember to hit the bell icon so you get the notifications of the Tennis Talk daily live streams. We're going live daily. Yes, I admit I didn't deliver. I wasn't the delivery man last night because I was just so exhausted after that late night stream on the Federer match, which got some pretty substantial views, and that was nice to do. But I will actually go live, at least I'm planning on going live later today to cover the day 10 matches. It might be a little later tonight. Or maybe I'll go on in between. I'm still trying to figure it out. I mean, I would like to have both of the quarterfinal matches in our pockets so we can kind of size them up. But we have lots of fantastic tennis coming. This thing is now narrowing down to the most exciting stages. We're going to have Nadal versus Delpo. Oh, I'm sorry. We can do a little bit of a preview on Nadal versus Delpo. They met in the quarterfinal at Wimbledon recently. It was 5 sets. Nadal prevailed. Nadal's prevailed at the French Open against Delpo and the semifinal as well. And at the U.S. Open in 2017, on the way to taking his title, Nadal plowed through Delpo in the semifinal, as many of you remember. Well, at the 2009 U.S. Open, Delpo was able to take care of Nadal, and that was a straight set victory. So this, I think, is really the key. Delpo's got to go back and look at this match. Of course, that was sort of a different Delpo, but he seems to be approaching that same kind of form that he displayed in 2009. It was a straight set victory, of course. He was 100% on his break point. 100% saving his break points that Nadal had created on the Delpo serve. So that's really important. He's got to deliver on the clutch moments. Nadal will create the break points, and Delpo must, as he did in 2009, save them, preferably at a rate of 100%. That would be best. Delpo was 41% on his second serve points, which isn't great, but he was much better on the first serve, obviously. He was 6 of 16 on the break point conversions and 70% on his second serve receiving points, which is fantastic. So I would say it's going to be all the key to Delpo winning this match, according to the 2009 match, which is a long time ago, but the key must be attacking the Nadal second serve. Again, he was 70%, winning 70% of the second serve return points against Nadal in 2009, where he prevailed over the excitable bull in straight sets, 3 sets. So he needs to create the break points. He needs to convert them at a fairly good rate, say 30 to 40%. and he needs to attack the Nadal second, which are the seconds are coming in very strong for Nadal, as we saw the other night, last night. Nadal looked very strong, folks. It is truly mind-boggling how the man can stay positive, stay committed, notwithstanding an incredible loss in that first set. It was it was stupefying to watch Thiem take the great Nadal to the bagel shop, and then it was equally stupefying to watch Nadal basically execute something of a reversal. And he found his game, and he fought hard. Like a valiant street fighter, he fought hard. There were hard times. There were botched shots that might have killed a lesser player's spirit. That's the truth. That first set and a couple of those botched volleys from Nadal could have killed a lesser player's spirit, and it might have even killed Roger Federer's spirit. But he was able to execute a reversal, and he was able to just fight. Right, he went toe-to-toe with Thiem. Thiem's level slipped a bit, but not much. And the nugget on this match, essentially, folks, is that both were winners. Nadal did outlast Thiem and edge Thiem a bit on the numbers in terms of the aggregate numbers. But, you know, if you jump into the fourth set or the first set, those numbers are very heavily favored or heavily weighted over to Thiem's side. So Thiem was able to hit more winners. There were more unforced errors. Nadal was a little more consistent. But basically, Nadal required that Dominic Thiem play virtually perfect tennis. And based on how this match proceeded, based on the 5-set outcome, Thiem actually delivered virtually perfect tennis for a lot of the match, for a good portion of the match. It was a great match. I would say it was the best match so far in this U.S. Open. Thiem versus Nadal, quarterfinal of the 2018 U.S. Open. So far, the best match of the tournament, without question. And that's because both players were turning out some phenomenal tennis, mostly from the baseline. It was a baseline slugfest. That's what Thiem does. But in closing, for you Fed fans, yes, Thiem is amazing. And I'm getting a question about whether Millman might have a chance against Djokovic. That's the one match that I have not really discussed in this stream. So I can make a remark or two about that. Djokovic took care of Millman at Queen's Club earlier this year very decisively. Those, of course, are faster courts, a completely different ball of wax in a way, but it was a 6-2, 6-1 affair. I think Millman will have to essentially try. I mean, the style of game he brings is Djokovic-like. And the way I see this going, if there's an upset, it's going to be the kind of upset that Chung pulled against Djokovic at the Australian Open, because Chung is kind of a baby Djokovic as well. But it's going to be the athleticism in, you know, the battle of the amazing athletes, essentially. And you're going to have the elastic hyena who will be retrieving everything. And Djokovic, based on his recent matches, folks, is in such fine form. He's pretty much unstoppable. I still believe that Nadal, precisely for the reason that Thiem was so good last night, but that Nadal came through in the end. For that reason, Nadal is still my favorite to win this tournament. I will be looking forward very much to the Nadal versus Delpo match. I just gave you a kind of breakdown of some of their recent meetings, and in particular the meetings at the U.S. Open. But to summarize that, again, Delpo's going to have to fend off the break points. They're going to be created, but he's going to have to deliver some clutch tennis in those moments. He's going to have to create break points on Nadal's serve, but most of all, and this was the key to his 2009 win over Nadal, is he is going to have to attack the Nadal second. Now, the Nadal second will probably almost always be coming into the Delpo backhand, but to the extent that Delpo can sort of neutralize these serves with his backhands, hopefully a few will come into his forehands. And it's going to be all about the Delpo serve and the forehand. He is capable of wiping Nadal off the court with first serves and walloping forehands. So, anxiously anticipating that. Let me close by saying, since I have talked about Thiem and Nadal, I just wanted to reiterate the beauty of Dominic Thiem. He's a promising player. We're going to keep following him very closely. He brings a wonderful one-hander, but the nugget on Thiem, the upshot about Thiem, is that because he brings this big serve, which is Federer-esque, as well as the one-hander, which is also Federer-esque, but at the same time brings that devastating baseline game, which is, to be honest, a better ground game than Federer's. But the ground game that he offers is very Nadal-like. So one of the beautiful things about Thiem is that he combines Federer and Nadal, folks. He does. He is a two-headed monster. He is the embodiment of Fedal in a way. That's why I love him. And that's part of the reason why, but also based on his actual records and results in recent months, that's why I believe he is a future Grand Slam champion. He's a member of the so-called lost generation, but I do not believe he's lost. I love Dominic Thiem. Congratulations, Dominic. You are in many ways there were two winners in the match last night in many respects, and I think Nadal even made a suggestion to that effect. There was a touching coming together at the end of the match between Nadal and Thiem, and Nadal understands very well that Thiem is a future Grand Slam champion. After that match, Nadal understands very well. Nadal escaped. He was more consistent. He persevered through 5 sets. I think all the pieces are there that will enable Nadal to defend his title. But the hyena has something to say about that. The Legend Slayer will do everything in his power to stop Nadal, and it's going to be an exciting matchup if that happens. And if it happens, it'll be in the final. Djokovic will first have to get through Millman, and then probably Cilic. I believe that Cilic may be able to push through Nishikori. But Nishikori, I called Alexander Zverev about a week ago. I called him the snake in the grass in this tournament because he seemed to be coming through in straight sets and posting some tremendous numbers. But I think Nishikori is now the potential snake in the grass, slithering his way through this tournament, taking out Kohlschreiber, taking out Schwartzman. He's going to have a lot on his hands with the mighty Croat and 2014 U.S. Open champion Marin Cilic. But it's going to be a great match. If Nishi slithers through, if he will be the snake in the grass, if he can get through to meet Djokovic in the semifinal, he will be officially the snake in the grass at the U.S. Open. So that'll be an interesting match. A lot of great tennis coming up. I'm going to try to do another live stream tomorrow. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel to get all of the Tennis Talk Daily live streams. We're doing them daily during the U.S. Open. This is live and uncut. We're taking this tournament apart from every single angle. We are committed to following every part of this historic event. We lament Roger Federer's exit on the one hand, but Federer is still in the conversation, and whether he's on the court in body is of no moment because he's always here in spirit. He's our main point of reference in the modern professional tennis culture, essentially. And so Federer is never going away. Subscribe to the channel because, again, if you're a Federer fan, he's always a point of reference. But most importantly, I hope you're tennis fans, and I hope you love the game more than any one player. That's how I feel. I love the game, and I want the best player to win no matter who it is. I want the best. If that ends up to be John Millman, well, we're going to celebrate. If that ends up Kei Nishikori, we're going to celebrate for the snake in the grass. If it ends up being the elastic hyena, we're going to celebrate because he is the legend slayer. He's capable of doing this. At this point, it's getting close. Nadal is slipping a little bit in my prediction. He's still my prediction to win the tournament, but he's slipping a little while Djokovic is moving up closer into second place. Basically, right on the hind end of Nadal at this point, and we're just going to have to look at the Millman match as well as the subsequent, potentially it would be Djokovic versus Cilic, but also we're going to have to look at Nadal versus Delpo. And then at that point, once the semifinals are over, I will make the final prediction of a champion. It might just be sticking to the girl I came to the dance with, as it were, and I'll maybe just confirm that Nadal is the predicted winner. So far, that's still my prediction. Nadal looked great last night. Thiem was pretty much superhuman at times and Nadal was still able to push through a close match in the end. Both players played spectacularly. But Nadal ends up the victor because he delivered the clutch tennis in more of the key moments. Lots of great commentary coming up. Lots of great matches coming up. I invite you to subscribe. I invite you to comment. Hit the notification bell so you get notification of all the live Tennis Talk Daily live streams. We're doing live and uncut commentary on every single angle of this U.S. Open. We'll talk more about the women a little later today. This episode has been catch-up because I fell asleep last night, exhausted in the final set of the Nadal versus Thiem match. So we're just doing some housekeeping on day 9. I wanted to do a discussion of those matches. I will, in all likelihood, be back tonight to cover day 10. Thank you so much, Patrick, for your support. Thank you so much for joining the live streams. I hope you've enjoyed it. Enjoy the tennis. Please enjoy the tennis because we have some great tennis on the horizon. It's coming up right now. In fact, it's going to start in a few minutes. So enjoy the U.S. Open, and I will look forward very much to seeing you soon. Signing off from Boston. Bye.